Hello, everybody, and welcome back to No Date But Today, the show where we look back at the 2005 adaptation of the 1996 Tony Award-winning musical Rent. I'm Blake, and on the line, I have a very special guest from Broadway World, friend of the Blake and Sal show, Matt Tamanini. Matt, how you doing?
Good, Blake. How are you?
Good. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about this abhorrent movie version of a great Broadway musical.
Well, I will actually ask you, I know you're not a big fan of the movie. What is your issue with the movie?
Well, a lot of things, first off. And while I adore the original Broadway cast, especially on that original Broadway cast album, they were probably too old to play the parts on Broadway originally, to be fair. Well, maybe they were on the borderline. But when you take that a decade-ish later and you work in the fact that they're dealing with a lot of close-ups, they just looked too old to be playing those parts. So that's one thing. But that's minor. I can get over that. I can suspend my disbelief when it comes to an actor's age in relationship to the character. My issues more have to do with Christopher Columbus's direction. I just feel like he robbed the show of what was an avant-garde, cutting-edge feel and made it very sanitized, not in the content, because the content is mostly the same. It's more in the approach. The visuals are very clean and crisp and scrubbed and colorful, and it just feels like they took what was a work of kind of disruptive theater and turned it into something that was in a lot of ways commercially packaged. Now, I understand Rent ran on Broadway for however many years. It closed in 2008, so 22 years, whatever. And I understand that it was very commercially successful and continues to be to this day. But it still maintained at its heart the original intention of Jonathan Larson and Michael Greif and all of the creators, to where it still was essentially a blank space with a bunch of scaffolding and some chairs and a table and not a lot of, I don't know, decoration and not a lot of, slick production values. And that's when that show is at its best. And I feel like the movie, maybe just because inherently of the nature of film, robbed the story of that. And I think Christopher Columbus, who, is not exactly known for gritty, emotional dramas, was probably the exact wrong person to do that film. Granted, I've loved a lot of movies that he's done before and since. I just feel like you could not have found a worse marriage between story and director, and I feel like that's where my biggest hangups come in. I'll make fun of the fact that, Adam and Anthony and Adina and Tay and whatever, they all looked way too old to be these characters. They're supposed to be in their early 20s, but that's secondary to the fact that the film, I felt, lost the internal feelings of what that show was all about.
I get what you're saying. I get it. I guess I never had that problem, and I've seen the Broadway show on Broadway 4 times, so it's not like I'm not a huge fan of the Broadway show. I don't know. It's
to each his own. It just, for me, and maybe it's the time that I'm of the age where I was in high school when the show originally came out, and I wore out my cast album. It was at the time where CDs were around, so I remember putting the CD on, singing it in my room, going to the bathroom to brush my teeth or something, and coming back and being able to continue to sing in the exact same spot 2-3 minutes later because I knew the album that well. So to me, this show is so ingrained in my development as a musical theater fan that it is precious to me. Now, I am completely aware that it is not a perfect work of musical theater. I also understand that had Jonathan Larson not died before it originally began performances at the New York Theater Workshop, that the Rent we know today might very well be very different than what it could have been. So I realize that as well. But just from a sentimental and developmental perspective, Rent is very important to me, and I felt like the things that I found to be at the core of the story of Rent were robbed in the film adaptation.
Okay. I can see what you mean. I mean, it's funny because we're talking about What You Own, for those who are wondering where we actually are in the movie.
You're living in America at the end of the millennium. You're living in America. Leave your conscience at the tone. And when you're living in America at the end of the millennium, you're what you want.
And I was rewatching it back right before we got on the line. And taking my notes, like I do. I'm very detailed with my notes. And it was one of those things where we're in New York the entire movie. We're here. I love the fact that we did it in New York. I love the little details they added to make it New York. But then suddenly we're in New Mexico for like 5 minutes. It's the only thing that's really bothered me this whole movie. The fact that we jumped to New Mexico for... And I understand why they did it. I get it.
Sure. But narratively, it makes sense. But you're right. I mean, and that's one of the main differences, because, and we talked about this, in emailing about doing the show, is that this is one of the sections that is pretty much an exact translation from stage to screen. Now, obviously, the change from stage to screen, will impact how it's presented. But in terms of the text, it is the same. So that is one thing that it has going for it.
Yes. The one thing I do say is they do, in finale A, finale B, they explain and they show you what they explain, which I don't mind, because they do it a lot in the movie, where they're showing stuff that they explain in song in the Broadway show, which I'm okay with that, personally. So that's one of the things they do here. What I do like is the detail of, seeing Mark at work, actually working, which I like, because it's something that's, assumed that he does. And I like to see that. It's also nice to see, Sarah Silverman show up for, one more scene. Just because they can get her.
Yeah, which is always fun.
Yes. By the way, what did you think of having Sarah Silverman in here as Lexi Darling? Because I love the casting.
I was aware of Sarah Silverman back then, but I don't think I really knew who she was. So I think it was cool. I mean, going back and thinking about it now, because really, when you think about this, there's no one else in the film that has become anybody. I mean, Idina Menzel's current husband, Aaron Lora, is in the movie as Steve.
Yes.
But other than that, there's not there's nobody that became big other than Sarah Silverman. So it's kind of neat. She seems like a good Alexi Darling. You had Randy Graff who played Mark's mom, who was a Broadway person. So a lot of us knew her. Anna Devere Smith was Mrs. Jefferson, but she was a star before this. So, but nobody's gone on to have their career kind of blow up anywhere near the level of Sarah Silverman. So I thought that was really cool.
Well, except maybe Idina Menzel.
I meant not from the main cast, the people who weren't originally in it, but some of these other people that would have just been ensemble folks in the Broadway version. You don't. The people who are kind of the smaller parts in the film, no one's really had a huge career other than Sarah Silverman.
True. There was one, I was doing my research, I think it was the on the street sequence right before Santa Fe, and the woman they had there as the lady who yells at Mark was from the original Broadway show as well. So I thought that was cool.
Yeah, there's definitely a few of those. Yeah, and that's what's one of the nice things about a lot of stage-to-screen adaptations is that they do try to get people in who have a history with the show, even if it's not in the roles that they originally played. Like this one was, if you go and look at the Last 5 Years film adaptation that Anna Kendrick and Jeremy Jordan did a few years ago, you see a lot of people who have history with that show in different parts in the film. Sherry Renee Scott, who played one of the leads originally, she's, I think, one of the producers. Betsy Wolfe, who did it off Broadway, she's the stripper who Anna Kendrick's character Kathy shares a dressing room with. So that's one of the nice things, that anytime you have a musical adapted for the screen, a lot of times for us theater nerds, we get to see folks that we know have a connection to it in the movie version, which is always a nice little Easter egg for us.
True. Very true. Now back to the song. This is one of my personal favorite songs. Period. Broadway history. I love this song. It's almost like a mantra song for me. One of those I play, put me in a good mood, snap me out of a funk. This is a great song. Just throw it out there.
No, I enjoyed. This is one of my favorites as well. We can get into the presentation in the film. I always say that my favorite show tune of all time is the reprise of "I'll Cover You."
Oh, of course,
in the cast album. I don't necessarily love the version that Jesse does in the film as much, just because he kind of changes it up a little bit, and it's fine. But I love the one from the original cast album.
I could agree with that 100%. But we go here. The song in the Broadway show, it's pretty simple. They're on the stage, they're doing their thing, and they're saying their point of view, which, like you said, is extremely simple, which is great for the stage. Fantastic for the stage. In the movie, they have to explain a little more. They got to show it. And I guess they didn't really want to have another sequence where they're just watching two people sing. I guess that's something they didn't want to do, because they did that at the beginning with One Song Glory. Even in One Song Glory, they showed flashbacks.
Right.
Here, they're just kind of almost like the trope of a musical where you have to play a song and then you kind of fast forward through time. We have to get us to a certain point, so we're going to show you everything that happened in a month's time, 2 months' time, in a 3-minute song.
Yeah, and that's and you kind of have to do that when you take it to the screen, because this song is that same. I mean, that's what it does on stage. It takes you from Halloween to Christmas Eve. Roger goes to Santa Fe and comes back in that time. So I understand why they did it. But man, is it cheesy. It's that's the Christopher Columbus effect. To me, the song works so well on stage because it tells the parallel stories of Mark and Roger. They've had this blow up after
Goodbye, Love.
After the funeral, right? And they both get to the fact that Mark purposely distances himself from everybody around him. One, because he says it's how he's able to to do his art, but Roger accuses him of basically being scared. Mark accuses Roger of doing something similar because he's pushing everybody away because he doesn't want to get hurt. So it's the same parallel stories. What works so well on stage for me is the fact that we see them on stage and it's a duet, even though they're not singing it to each other or in the confines of the narrative with each other. But the choreography of it is so great on stage because what you do is you see them crossing and you see them looking almost directly at each other as they're singing, but then they're passing each other. They're like two ships passing in the night. Obviously, one's in New York, one's in Santa Fe. And the effect of that and the relationship between what is going on for them personally, in their friendship, and in the time when they're apart is really impactful when it's on stage. In the film version, you've got Roger randomly walking through Red Rock. I mean, and it's like, and Mark is singing on his bike. And I mean, like, I get it. Like, logically, I understand why you have to do it this way. But it takes, to me, what a song is that's super powerful, it just makes it a little cheesy. And again, I'm not a director of major motion pictures, so I'm not going to question Christopher Columbus that he could have done it differently, although I think he could have. I don't know what that would have been. But it's just, that's the best we got. I mean, you couldn't have found a more creative way to do that and tell that part of the story while still maintaining what I think is the most impactful visual part of the stage version.
I will say, I do love the Mark stuff in the montage because I like the fact that he's working out his film and he's kind of in his own world, which I like. I do like that
makes
a lot.
sense.
And also, I like the fact that it's almost like he's watching his film and it's all the stuff we've seen already, and we can see him looking at his life like, what has gone on in this last year, which I like too. That's an important detail. And it just feels like,
no, totally. And the